Yes, everyone, we are live here in the spoiler room. So glad you could join us today, everyone. And it is continuing our Don't Fuck with Chuck month. That's right. And it's another Cannon Fodder episode. This one was also one that was voted on by the listeners like you out there. And yes, we are looking at Missing in Action 2, The Beginning from 1985. And with me tonight to talk about this interesting sequel is none other than my co-host, right-hand man, and just general gentleman. So I'm told. Reports have yet to be confirmed. It's Ian Simmons, everyone. Hello, Ian. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. I'm really looking forward to talking about this movie with you because I think it's going to be a similar conversation to last week, but also very different.
Yes, it is. So, as always, because you are so eloquent and better with words than myself, could you please tell our listeners what Missing in Action 2, The Beginning, is all about?
Well, it's 1985, all right? So you open up with like a graveyard scene and these two guys going up to this, like it's raining and there's this really crappy like makeshift grave and they prop it open and there's a corpse inside with a hockey mask. That's a new beginning. I'm sorry.
It's a new beginning. No, this is the beginning. Wrong beginning. You got your beginning. Understandable.
Yeah. And about as good quality. Anyway, I'm giving away my hand right off the bat in the beginning of the synopsis. All right. So previously in Missing in Action 1, we had Chuck Norris as James Braddock getting out of a long internment in a Vietnam prisoner of war camp. He goes back on a diplomatic mission to rescue people that he knew was back in country. This movie is ostensibly the origin story of his time in that camp. And essentially, his helicopter gets shot down following a rescue mission. He and a number of other soldiers are in this camp run by the evil, I guess, Colonel Yin, played by Soon Tek Oh. And they're tortured and they're teased and just, all hope is lost until, spoiler alert, Jim Braddock breaks free and goes on a one-man mission against the tyrannical Vietnamese colonel and his soldiers. Anyway, that's Missing in Action 2, The Beginning.
Yeah.
I'll just say, this is the movie that I was expecting Mission in Action 1 to be. And I think if this, because this is the prequel, I think if the prequel had come out first, I think it would have done fine because it's a Chuck Norris action movie. But then you have the sequel, which is like Braddock is back in America and then he wants to go back. I think it would have been pretty amazing because it's a huge step backwards from part 1 down to part 2 as far as the messaging, as far as the exploitative elements, as far as everything, even the consistency. Like, this is not a prequel to Missing in Action 1 because nothing lines up at all except for the fact that Chuck Norris was in a Vietnamese prison camp.
Funny you should mention that. I've got a little tidbit with that first.
Did you read the book finally?
I did read the book. I did read the chapter on it right here, folks. The Cannon Film Guide, Volume 1, 1980 to 1984. Yes, I am shamelessly plugging it because it has a whole chapter, a long chapter dedicated to Missing in Action trilogy, plus a great interview with, and I enjoyed it, even though the guy is from Milwaukee. That's not the only reason why I enjoyed it. But James Bruner, who's from Wisconsin, who wrote the script for Missing in Action, they do a great interview with him, and it's really crazy, the story behind this movie, these two movies. If you'll indulge me a little, I could give you a little background.
Oh yeah, we got to talk about something during this hour. Missing in Action 2 is not it.
In this book, and there's a reason why I keep bringing this book up, folks. I will announce it at the end of the episode. Keep you hanging on suspense. Anyway, funny thing is that So Chuck Norris was actually looking at doing a film called Missing in Action. And James Bruner wrote the script for Missing in Action initially. But that script that they were farming around, they were having a hard time getting made. Well, Chuck Norris ended up meeting with Cannon. And I'm paraphrasing. You have to read the book to find all the details because I'm sure I'm probably going to fuck some of this up. Anyway, James Brewer, he got input from Chuck Norris in that, and he wrote the script, and they weren't behind it. But Cannon had another script that happened to be called Missing in Action. Chuck Norris didn't realize that was the script Cannon wanted him to do, and not the original Missing in Action script that they had written. But they offered him a good chunk of money, and Cannon being Cannon, they basically faced Chuck Norris, who's a big star at this time, right then and there said, you got to make a decision right now. They had him read the script while they were there and said, yes or no, you got to say it right now. Otherwise, if you say no, that's it. You can't come back to it later. So Chuck, of course, said yes, because it's money. So they, and Bruner, but they still paid Bruner for the script. He's like, okay, whatever. So they shot a completely different script. They did rewrites in that. But he, as Bruner said it, hey, I still got money, but still it would have been nice to have that. They were liking what they were shooting so much. And I alluded to this kind of in our previous episode, that they called Bruner up to come and write the sequel before, and they were going to shoot it right after they were done shooting Missing in Action. So Bruner came down, wrote it. It went through some rewrites. They took that film and they shot it, and they liked that film better than the first film. So Cannon, in their wisdom, swapped the releases of the film. So Missing in Action, the one that we reviewed last week, is actually originally intended to be the second film. Missing in Action, the beginning, was the film they were going to release first, but they loved the second film so much they retooled it, called that Missing in Action. They took this film that was going to be first and called it The Beginning and made it a prequel.
So Missing in Action 2 was technically the first movie.
Yes, just not this Missing in Action 2. The movie that we saw, which is called Missing in Action, which is Cannon's second biggest box office ever, one of Norris's biggest blockbusters for this company. This is huge. They made $22.3 million domestically in 1985 for a company that wasn't a big studio. That's huge.
Yeah.
Okay. So that film was going to be the second film. And the one we're talking about tonight was going to be the first film, but the producers, in their infinite wisdom, liked that film better. And so they swapped the release dates.
Wow. Because they had two different directors. There was Joseph Zito on the quote unquote second one, which is technically the first. And now we've got Lance Houle doing this one. I mean, the second one. Yeah. It's too late for me to fully unpack this math, but I mean, I guess I'm kind of relieved in a way, but it's just such a bad movie.
Two is if they would have led with this, a lot of people have speculated if they would have led with Missing in Action, what's now called Missing in Action 2, The Beginning, had they led with this, if this was actually going to be the first film, they figure it would have never been that huge. But the one that James Bruner wrote and retooled was the one they fell in love better with, and so they released that one first, and that was smart. And Bruner would actually go on to write the Delta Force movie, and he would write Braddock, Missing in Action 3. So,
I was pulling up IMDb in preparation for this show, and I made the mistake I was just curious because after watching this movie, I'm like, what the hell are they going to do for part 3? And then I read the synopsis. I don't know if you've seen Braddock Missing in Action 3, but the tagline on IMDb says Braddock mounts a, wait for it, one-man assault to free his wife and son who are still being held in a Vietnamese prison camp. Okay, so what? They don't care about continuity at all with these damn movies.
Fun fact. I was organizing, and this is linked up. Don't worry, I'll get there. I was organizing the videos in the back. I've alphabetized, whatever. All of these, they're in order. Okay, most of them, 99%, they're in alphabetical order. And I found I have a lot of duplicates, but I also found stuff that I didn't realize I had. One, I've got far more Chuck Norris movies than I thought I did, and I found this treasure: Chuck Norris American Hero Collection. On DVD. It has Delta Force 2, and all 3 Missing in Action films.
Nice.
I didn't even know I had this. I went on HBO Max to watch the first Missing in Action because I'm like, I don't think I've got this film. And then when I was cleaning up and organizing my DVD, I go like, what's this? What's on the back? Oh shit! Look at that! All 3 Missing in Action films.
I don't know if that's out of print or what, but I think I saw that on Amazon. And it was really expensive. That's why I bought the Blu-ray of, like, it's got Delta Force and the first 2 Missing in Actions. I think I'm gonna have to go on find Braddock by other means, but yeah, I'll be ready for next week.
The box isn't in the best condition, but yeah, I discovered I had this. I'm like, oh, and this isn't awesome. Like, this isn't even like, one of those OwlNet, whatever, like third-party re-release. This is actually an MGM Sony Pictures home video release. So I was like, holy crap. Okay. So back to the film. Yes, folks. Missing in Action, the beginning. Yeah, it wasn't a story that we needed because it is the prequel. It's trying to lead you up to the events of why Braddock is a badass and how he saved the guys, that he became famous for. There's problems with the timeline in this film. First off,
all right. Now,
the film opens with what happens to Braddock and how his team got captured. They end up taking a helicopter, and they're on patrol, and they go to try to rescue some guys, and the pilots are killed, and good old Chuck Norris is wearing, and I'm calling him Chuck Norris. It's, yeah, you know who he is. Anyway, James Braddock is wearing his best Australian Outback hat.
I prefer to think he's kind of got the Robert Duvall and Apocalypse Now thing going on. Yeah,
kind of. So he comes out, and yeah, their helicopter gets shot down, and that's how they get captured. Now we then get credits. Fast forward to 84. So this happened in like 74, supposedly, or 70, early 70s, like 73, 74, that his helicopter went down. So we forward ahead to a clip where we've got actual news clip from real life, Ronald Reagan news clip of when they did the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, and they talked about those who were missing in action. And so then we cut to the camp where Braddock and his buddies are being held, and it's supposed to be 10 years later, but it really doesn't feel like it.
Well, I think and this is where the continuity sort of lines up with the first Missing in Action, which is technically the second, but I'm not going to get back into that. Because Braddock mentioned that he had been in that camp for like 8 or 10 years.
Right.
And then when Missing in Action 1 picks up, he'd only been out. He escaped like a year earlier.
Right.
So it kind of makes sense that if he got captured in 73 or 74, that it could fast forward to 1984. And just because they're in the deep jungles of Vietnam, that things haven't really changed. The most that you get of modernity is you've got Francois, the French opium dealer and gun runner, flying in on his helicopter. And I guess he's got a private jet or something later. So yeah, I mean, I get it. I think the idea is that they're so far deep in the jungle that people still kind of figure the war is going on, and it's
Right.
because there's no connection to modernity
Mhm.
that the Vietnamese prison camp runners are able to keep the prisoners under that
Right.
guise. They have no sense of like how many years have passed, or who's fighting who, if anybody's fighting anybody. And they do
Mhm.
a little bit of that dialogue in the movie, because they're trying to talk about like people are coming, who's coming, well, the war is over, no one's looking for us, and are you sure? And it's beautiful mind trickery. I mean,
Mhm.
disgusting, but I almost wish they'd focused more on that than the other nonsense they got going on.
Yeah, with Mazzilli, who was one of the survivors of Braddock's group, who I guess for me, they didn't look 10 years old. It didn't feel like they were actually in that camp for 10 years. The way they had been talking and some of the conversations they had, I'm like, please tell me you guys weren't having this exact same conversation for the last 10 years. Because if you watched other war pictures or other, even Vietnam pictures, the discussions they have about their personal life, wow, I didn't get a chance to see my wife or my kids or whatnot. I understand they don't have any time frame of how long it's been, but at the same time, they're talking like they've only been there a few years. The way the dialogue's written, when they've been there 10 years and they're still having the conversation of, oh, you haven't even had a chance to see your kids yet. I did before I left, but they don't mention, well, now my kid's 10 years older or my kid's whatever. I mean,
Well, and I think I understand what you're saying, but I think part of that, and again, I think a smarter movie might have explored this a bit, but when you're stuck in that situation, you're traumatized, your
mm,
brain trauma is sort of stuck in amber in that mode, because his
yeah,
kid, I don't think he had been born, or he had just been born or something.
yeah.
He hadn't gotten to see him because he was, not stateside. So he's probably thinking of his kid as being a baby.
Mhm.
There's a part of him that wishes that when he goes back to the States, he could see a baby so he won't miss out on his kid growing up, and all those
Right.
memories. But I get what you're saying. I was relieved that when I heard this as a prequel, we kind of joked about this last week, that, what are they going to do? They're going to like lighten Chuck Norris's beard or something to make him look younger, or what? But
Right.
they actually set it so that it's only a year, really, most of the action before the first movie, so he can still
Right.
look old and haggard. And I think they did a hell of a job making him look pretty beat up and and juggle weary in this movie.
They did. All the guys felt jungle weary. You felt the heat. I mean, the set and the production design, they're basically using the same camp set that we saw in Missing in Action. When they had the rescuing the new Americans who are still missing in action. It's pretty much the same camp.
I, you know, I'll take your word on that, but like in that opening scene, it just felt like they were in Southern California or something. It didn't seem very jungly. I'm like, well,
No.
I've never been to Vietnam, but every Vietnam movie I've seen looks more like, it looks like Predator looks more like Vietnam than what was going on here.
Well, especially in the beginning, because you got the helicopter, they're going in to rescue, which this Huey's got missiles on it, and the soldiers, the Viet Cong soldiers are all on a ridge, and I'm like, okay, just strafe them down with your missiles. But
Yeah.
they only fire missiles twice before a crack shot shoots the pilot. That's after they rescue the last few guys on the ground. And then we get this whole Suicide Squad type of thing where they're in the helicopter, and as they're jumping out, we get their name and then this big boom, MIA.
And I was just thinking about how that makes so much more sense if this is going to be the first movie, because it's
Right.
like missing in action. I'm like, I'm watching the sequel, which is the prequel. I'm like, yeah, we kind of covered this in the beginning, but if it's just MIA like all over the place, then yeah, this makes more sense, because this is supposed to be the missing in action movie.
Right. But when they're jumping out of the helicopter, there's a close-up shot of them jumping out of the helicopter. It's obvious the helicopter's on against a blue screen that's supposed to be a blue sky that you're supposed to jump out. Because when he says, quick, jump out, and you could tell it was not part of they weren't anywhere near the air.
I don't know. I bought every second of it.
But yeah, they jump out of the helicopter, credits and all that. And so it's an interesting opening and it's an interesting setup. You get the characters, I think one of the things that for me watching it again, because it's been a while since I watched it, is Vietnam films got into full swing just after the Missing in Action. It sounds weird, but it got the jump on the trend of Vietnam films that we got into the last half of the 80s. And you look at the formula for this one, and it so hits that basic tropish formula that you got out of every other bigger budgeted Vietnam film. I mean, the characters that you had the one guy who has a pet chicken, and that is going to die. You're like, he or the chicken is going to die at the end, which it does, and they're representations of different, different people in different, whatever classes, whatever, you've got your variety of different people who are all soldiers, all sharing the same experience. And each one of their characters is kind of cliche to what we've seen in other Vietnam films. And I think that's the one thing that was kind of getting me with the second one is like, okay, we've seen this guy before. We've seen this character before. Guess I know what's going to happen next. Yep. Sure enough, the evil soldier, who in all honesty, I did enjoy the performance of Soon Tek Ho, in this as Colonel Yin. I did like the Colonel Yin character quite a bit. I liked his performance.
It's a great performance. Yeah.
Not the way it was written.
Right. And I think that it's something you got to separate. And I think that's kind of unfortunate because kind of like we were talking about in the last movie where you've got, these Chuck Norris wandering through the shanty town with prostitutes everywhere. You just think about like the making of this movie. Like if they're filming it on location, it's like, yeah, we want you to dance around and just be half naked whores. Like, what does that say about like what we think of you? So I wonder, like, was there any conflict there about playing just like this one dimensional, Vietnamese bad guy? And the other thing is, I don't, this is going to sound really weird, but I know not all Asian cultures and Asian people are the same. So I've seen a few of these actors in other films. I don't know if any of them are actually Vietnamese or if they're Chinese or whatever, but there's just some of that. I just had this nagging thing that it was the early to mid 80s. And you're like, oh, there's an Asian guy. Just have him play the Vietnamese camp commander. It just, these weird little things that bug me, especially now.
Well, and this series is been accused of jingoism and the misportrayal of nationalities and such. I mean, it's got it has gotten controversy for their portrayal, though. In this film, they do. You can see they're trying not to say this is all the Viet Cong. It's just this camp and this particular general who's being the way he is. Versus the first one, in which they were kind of more painting a broader brush of Vietnam and the people running Vietnam. And we talked about the serious scene where they had the oppressed villagers show up and lie about Braddock killing kids and civilians. And they kind of take that approach here, I think, or they were trying to. We don't get an outside world perspective really, so it's hard to say. But in this camp, we do have Vietnamese who are also prisoners at this camp. At least that's what I gathered, that they were also Vietnamese. So they were trying, I think, to portray that we're not saying all Vietnamese are like this, doing it poorly. And in the end, it still is like, well, you're still portraying, you're still coming across as saying, yeah, the Vietnamese are the bad guys and America's good guys. But I think they try to paint that line, thread that needle.
I'll agree that they may have tried, but there was so much more nuance in the first Missing in Action, as far as what you're talking about, like the wider scope of the country and America's involvement with that conflict. In this one, it is just, and that's why it makes so much more sense that this is kind of the first movie, because it's a bad, even James Braddock is, he's more of the monosyllabic, like just stare at people and not really talk except to say, you know, I'm going after Ho, or, you know, if I'm not back in 24 hours, you know, that kind of, you know, cliche nonsense. He's just a killing machine. There's just, I don't like we get the captain, the colonel and his henchmen in the first movie, different actors, different circumstances, because of course the colonel in this movie gets blown up in the hut at the end after a hand-to-hand combat, which can we just jump to the end for a second?
Sure.
All right. Let me get this straight. They've been in this camp for 10 years. They've killed a whole lot of people, and a lot of their number have been, you know, they've been decimated essentially. A few of them managed to get a helicopter and fly away. Yin they think he's been blown up, but he's not. He's the last survivor. He gets up, he sees the helicopter flying away, and all of a sudden Chuck Norris is standing behind him, and they have this hand-to-hand combat. And at the end, Chuck Norris walks up a hill to the helicopter. What was that conversation like? Hey guys, I know we're barely escaping with our lives. There's a good chance that there's some survivors here who have radios that could call in for reinforcements, and they could come and outnumber us and kill us. Can you just wait on top of that hill so I can enact my personal vendetta against this guy who we could just leave in the jungle to die and never hear from him again? Sure. Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Good luck. There's absolutely no chance that you could get killed or injured, and we could just be waiting here sitting ducks. Go for it, Jim.
Well, you know, by this time, I think they're just like, okay, whatever. They trust Braddock because he just saved them. So
Mazzelli really wants to see his kid. He's not going to hang around. He'd be like, no,
well,
he was do that.
He was hanging around because we had a couple of soldiers who caught him, because we get this wonderful. So to set it up, folks, the first 40 minutes are Vietnamese soldiers putting our guys through various torture, which if you've watched other Vietnam films after that came out after this, you've seen this before. I mean, none of these tactics, and they're tactics that have been told, that proven that these were tactics that were used in prisoner of war camps. I am not downplaying that at all. I'm just saying that the first chunk of this film is the setup of making the soldiers and the bad guys really bad guys, so that it justifies later on Braddock going through and torching them. So because Yin at one point tortures literally one of Braddock's men after he gets one of the guys has been suffering from malaria. We figure it's malaria. And he's been sicker and sicker, and soon he can't work at the camp anymore. He's about to die. The Yin, for 10 years, Yin has been writing Braddock to confess that he's a war criminal. Okay. And he's being the stout soldier and saying no, and completely understand. They set it up, you know, okay, got that, no problem. Then his buddy gets malaria, is going to die. They trust Yin to give their buddy the antidote, for malaria. Give him the cure for malaria if Braddock signs it. So Braddock finally signs after 10 years to save his buddy, which is noble. But at the same time, I'm like, you've been around this general for 10 years and you're trusting him to inject your buddy with what you think is the cure for malaria, and you sign before you find out if your buddy's healthy or not. You know what I mean? I mean, even for their characters, that part kind of was the head scratcher. It was like, up until that point, okay. But these are the guys who've been torturing you for 10 years with all this psychological stuff. And I understand your buddy's dying, but at the same time, suddenly you trust Yin to do the right thing.
It's a sloppy bridge to get to one of the more tasteless scenes in this movie. There's plenty of tasteless scenes in this movie, but you know, it's the guy who was dying of malaria. The shot he gets is actually an overdose of opium. So he like shoots up and he's all delirious and he's feeling great all of a sudden, but then he kind of collapses, and Yen at this point has Braddock put into the paddock within eye shot of this, what turns out to be a funeral pyre. They take the opium overdose guy out, dose him in gasoline. Yin lights a barbecue torch and sets him on fire. So he's watching his friend get burned alive.
Yep.
That's horrible. But it is, to what you were saying, part of that first 40 minutes, carrying over to the other part of the movie. Because like the last half hour of this thing is like the revenge mission where Braddock gets free and just starts killing everybody. Right. But it is just meant to say, oh, these evil camp people, I really hate them. I want to get the audience to hate them so they can have that rah-rah, go Braddock, go America bullshit at the end. It's just so one-dimensional. You don't get a whole lot of these characters, the versions of these characters in the first Missing Action, but because you've got the wider context, and we talked about this last week, you can understand that this is a war in which an invading, occupying force came into their country, and so they're fighting back. So you can kind of put yourself in their place. It's like, yeah, if the Vietnamese came and invaded America and we were forced to, fight people in our streets and villages and stuff, and they were torturing people, yeah, we'd fight back and we'd probably be as vicious as hell. But in this, the war is over. So you just get the idea that these are just sadistic, cartoonishly sadistic, single track people. What is Yin? Does he have a family? What's the political structure, the business structure that he's working under? What does he really want? Can he afford, what's the economy? Can they afford to just be that cruel and hang out and torture prisoners and being paid to hold on to these people? Well, nothing makes sense.
Well, he's got that opium business because he's in league with Francois and they're running opium and weapons.
Right. But I'm wondering, is the greater Vietnamese government unaware of what he's doing? Are they in cahoots? I can't believe that he's got this little fiefdom out in the jungle that's been going on for a decade, and he's just allowed to do whatever he wants. Maybe that's the case, but I'm more interested in that story than just like, I really want you to sign this confession. You won't do it, so I'm going to stand here and torture you for 10 years.
Yeah, it's where you mentioned sloppy, especially considering the first one. And we talked about the first one. The first one was an equal balance of just the cheesy canon action we're always used to, but also moments and sections that gave you ideas to motivation, how things were going to be. Nothing too deep, but still, there was more meat there than you expected. Here, there is no real meat. We don't know. I got the impression that he was on his own generally, like Yin had this camp on his own, and that possibly some of the Vietnamese government may have known about it, but just chose to ignore it. I'm not sure because it's never set up. We just know that it's 10 years later and they still got the soldiers in the camp and they're running it like it was still 1970, 1970, basically 1971. And yeah, it's kind of a head scratching of, well, wait, is it? Because there's no dialogue. There's no illusion that even those in control of the camp have whatever connection to the outside world outside of Francois, who brings in hookers and blow. Well,
that's redundant, by the way.
Insert that, yes, okay, depending on how you look at it. But anyway, they don't really set that up, so it is, you're right, more one-dimensional here that we get this. They're very caricatures. Everything's caricature in this. I mean, not just the bad guys, but our good guys as well. You mentioned Braddock, who's got plot armor, who just, you understand his motivation watching them, torch a friend of his alive, which is horrible. Don't get me wrong, it's horrible, and that's what triggers him. At the same time, that also gave me a bit of a head scratching though, because I was counting guards and I was figuring out prisoners. And I understand the whole psychological warfare thing. Don't get me wrong, I'm very sensitive to the fact that they were using psychological warfare on these guys forever. But at the same time, I'm looking at this going, now Braddock chooses to escape because he's the guy with the most skills, apparently, this colonel. And he proves it. He's a one-man wrecking crew that goes through and takes out most of the guys at the camp for the most part until at the very end where he gets some help. I'm like, you waited till now to go all, pardon me, Rambo, which he's wearing a Rambo outfit at one point in this film. Yeah. I guess that was a little head scratcher for me. And I know it's dumb. It's an action film, but especially compared to the first one and compared to the potential you see here with this, you're like, they went this empty route to where even thinking just lightly about it, I'm like, 10 years and you haven't done what you did. You haven't coordinated some other escape plan,
It's just an the origin of, or the beginning of this conversation, it all makes sense that this movie was supposed to be the first, and then they made the better version of this movie, which has no continuity between it. Because if you think about it, this movie should be dull and impossible. Because what you've got is Chuck Norris looking like Chuck Norris and acting like Chuck Norris, but he's been in this Vietnamese prison camp for 10 years. Realistically, he would look more like the 4 guys that Braddock rescued at the end of the first Missing in Action.
Right.
They were lean. They were very clearly soldiers, but they were lean. They were paranoid. They were squirrely. They could just pick up their guns, and you get the feeling that they were running on pure adrenaline. But unless Braddock is sneaking away to do like secret crunches and Tai Chi or whatever, get protein shakes, he's not going to look like that after being in a prison camp.
Well, they did work the guys pretty hard. That's a lot of physical labor, so you could build up, you build up muscle from doing all that work,
right? But they're also being starved. I imagine they're subsisting on like maybe rice and water, if that.
And that's wherein I had the slight problem with this of continuity wise, because none of the characters seemed like they were in the dire straits that they were in. And again, I'm not making light of actual situation. I'm talking about within the context of the film, these characters, for what they went through, you're right, look like they just hopped out of the helicopter last year. They don't look like they've been run through the ringer the last 10 years. And that's why I had a little problem with the time frame with this. I'm like, looking at them and even the way they're acting and how they've still kept it together. On one hand, you're going, great, they're strong soldiers. This is how resilient they are. And thanks to Braddock's leadership, they've been able to hold their sanity. But we're talking 10 years of the psychological warfare, including grabbing a random guy saying he's being condemned for crimes against the Vietnamese government and war atrocities, an empty gun, and they pull the trigger twice on the guy's head as if he's going to die. And given the past experience, they think this could be it. And it freaks them out and it breaks this guy. And you're like, they've been doing this type of psychological warfare for so long, yet the way their characters are behaving, they aren't as you would expect. And on one hand, like I said, maybe they're trying to say resilience. On the other hand, you're expecting these guys to have a little bit more going on with them than what we see.
Well, that's an interesting point. I hadn't thought about it until you mentioned it. Like that whole, I'll call it the Vietnamese roulette thing, because it's not quite Russian roulette, because that's a fear tactic. The gun is just empty. They're just trying to scare people. It feels like they just invented that today. Whereas I imagine in this scenario, it's something that they would have been through a lot, over the course of a decade. Some of the torture is made out to be, I could just see this, and it's probably been memed at some point because Chuck Norris is a legend now. But when they tie Braddock up and hang upside down and then put the rat in the sack and then tie that to his head, it's a whole struggle of like, everyone thinks he's dying because there's blood appearing in the sack, and they take it off, and it turns out Braddock is such a badass that he grabbed the rat with a few scratches on his face, and he basically chewed his head halfway off. So they take the cloth off, and he's got the rat's body dangling out of his mouth. Like, yeah, that's haha. But there's just so much of that like badassness that's dumb action movie stuff that's in a movie that's about a really serious issue that the quote unquote first movie handled a lot more tastefully. I could handle the dumb action stuff, like him sneaking onto that embassy compound and getting the general in the bed. I could buy that because I knew that the rest of the movie had its heart in the right place. This movie's heart is in the garbage.
I guess I would be say garbage, but yeah, it's misplaced. It's definitely misguided. It's yeah, it's a serious subject, and we have, you know, we've seen the Rambo films, but even then, the Rambo films, up until like his until he was taking on Russians with a bow and arrow, the first two were handled more serious. They were action films, but they were handled a bit more serious. And like you said, the first film actually handles this with equal parts seriousness and cheesiness, whereas this is just so cliche, dumb action, yet they're also trying to present the atrocities of Vietnam. And we've seen other Vietnam films, and I know I keep bringing it up, but it's just true within the context of watching it now. You see how this is, and even back then, kind of mishandling the subject matter. I mean, within the context of the film, I mean, the flashback scenes we got in the first film handled it more serious than the scenes we get that are supposed to be the events taking place, like the scene where Braddock gets his stomach cut by the guy who he later sees as part of the government in Vietnam in the first one. That scene with him getting cut is actually handled with some weight. It's handled with some emotion. We see Braddock kind of helpless and getting toward, and that's all you needed. And in here, where you would think you would get more of that, it's just handled in such an action way, though there are still some serious parts. At one point, an Australian reporter shows up to take pictures. He is the least stealthiest guy. I don't know which was worse in this film. The soldiers who are on watch, in quotes, because they're missing people in plain sight, or the stealthy reporter who's pretty much out there with his camera taking pictures pretty much out in the open, not even looking around to see if there's guards coming towards him or anything.
He's also out in Vietnam in the jungle wearing shorts.
Yes. So how far out were they? Because he went how far in shorts in the Vietnamese jungle?
I don't know. I actually liked this character, for the 5 minutes he's on screen, because it's an interesting idea. He shows up, he gets captured, because he's not slick at all. No. But he gets taken into the camp and he's talking to Yin. He's like, I've got a homing device. I'm part of this, international organization that's here to find, prisoners of war. So if I don't report in, yada, yada, yada. And you're like, oh, this is getting really interesting. Like, because he's like, there's an option, you could turn yourself over to me. You could cut and run, or you could wait here and the cavalry is going to come and wipe you all out. I would like to see any of those options. But of course, Yin kind of turns the tables on him and says, well, here's the option where I just kill you and we take our chances, or I throw you in prison. He throws the guy in prison. Guy gets into prison. And he's like, everyone's like, we're going home. And he's like, no, I just made all that up just so I could buy myself some time. Nobody's coming. I'm like, this is, really kind of cool. And then Francois shows up and Emerson finally starts to panic. He's like, that's the one guy who can finger me and say, he's full of crap. And sure enough, that does happen. So yeah, it's a bit of, it's what passes for dimension in this movie. Plus I don't know who the actor was, but I just kind of liked his demeanor, and I was kind of sad to see him go. The
actor is Christopher Carey. And Christopher
Jim Carrey's brother. I don't know who that is.
No, Christopher Carey, who some Marvel fans out there may recognize as being from a Captain America movie from 1979, Captain America 2, Death Too Soon. He played Professor Ian Ilson in it. He was also in the Wonder Woman TV series for a couple episodes. So, and where I recognize him was from Sword and the Sorcerer, where he plays King Richard. So that's where I recognized him from. So he's a veteran actor. I like this character quite a bit. And this is the scene that I was thinking of. I had it misplaced as far as the setting. I kept thinking, I don't know why. Maybe it was a childhood trauma, because I did watch this when I was 10 years old. Hey, it's the 80s, okay? We've talked about it before. Anyway, there is probably one of the better squib gimmicks I've seen in any film, action film or otherwise, in this. They're doing the bullet thing with one of the soldiers, and it's obviously an empty gun. Well, once Emerson gets fingered, they do the gun thing again. They get him up on the platform. He says, "You've atrocities against the Vietnam government." You've got the one guy who then yells from the, "Don't worry, it's empty." Boom. No, the gun isn't empty. And they do a smash, like this hard cut to him just as the gun goes off. And this is where I was kind of talking about it last week. The flap of his head flies up, like he gets, it's one of the more impressive, yes, disturbing, but more impressive headshots I've seen in any movie. And you have it in this Cannon film, in all honesty. It's not extraordinarily bloody, but just a close-up of his head and the side of you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, and the what was more impressive, I think, for me was the actor's reaction.
Right.
Because it's not the typical, like, his eyes just roll back in his head and he falls over. It's that look of shock.
Mm-hmm.
Like his brain just, has been turned to mush, but there's a part of him that's still catching up to that fact. And he's like, just looks like,
and he's staring into the camera too. And that's,
I mean, it's eerie.
It is. That's the thing. And that's why that's one of the scenes that stuck with me. And I'm like, here you have a film, which we've already alluded to. I found some entertainment in it. Don't get me wrong. It's dumb action film. So it's got those elements, but at the same time, compared especially to the first film we watched, it is the lesser film. Mm-hmm. So you've got this ridiculous, more one-dimensional stuff with very less weight to it going on, even from the torture. But then you get this one moment in here that's actually very eerie and sticks with you and serious. And it's like, where the hell did this come from suddenly? You know what I mean? You know what I mean?
Yeah. And to what you had just said, there were parts I'm conflicted about this movie because it's the lesser film, but I was entertained by parts of it. We haven't really talked about Stephen Williams as was it Captain Nestor?
Yep. Go ahead.
Who was the guy that was being rescued in the beginning by Braddock in the helicopter. He ends up turning, in the name of self-preservation, turning himself over to Yin and being like his right-hand man liaison to the American POWs. I think there's a really fascinating movie hidden somewhere in here because I kept thinking about this character and why he was doing what he was doing beyond self-preservation. I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if, this is like the war happened, it ended in 75. Let's just say they got captured in 72 or 73. They have no concept of time. So this is someone who's still very much living through the conflicts of the civil rights era and the Vietnam with like lots of young, poor black soldiers and poor people of every ethnicity getting drafted, going over there. He may have seen this opportunity in the middle of hell to exert some authority that he probably couldn't find back home in a certain sense, and a way to buy time. So I was like, I would like to see a drama about that, because he kind of has heroic moments, or a noble moment towards the end, where he turns on Yin and takes some people out before he gets horribly shot. But I was just thinking about that. I'm like, making a more interesting movie in my head while this bland piece of crap is playing out in front of me. But I also really like Stephen Williams. I saw the conflict in him. He's not as one-dimensional as Yin is, which is kind of unfortunate, but yeah, I got some drama, some pathos in this thing.
Yeah, and again, there is some entertainment in here, and I think some of the best scenes work with Williams and interaction, especially with Braddock. Which I don't know if you caught it, but you're a rapper in the making, because you said Braddock and Paddock, and so your Braddock was in the paddock. But
eating some haddock, is that a fish? I don't know.
Haddock. Yeah, it is a fish. But anyway, some of the best scenes were between Stephen Williams and Chuck Norris, or just his character David Nestor with the POW soldiers. I liked those moments, and those moments again were bits and glimpses, and I would love to see that movie following his character almost more so than the characters in the prison, because he is a guy who still is giving them supplies, because we haven't talked about Captain Ho either, who is a Vietnamese soldier who's also a POW, who is the doctor of the POWs, and he and Nestor have this relationship where Nestor gets him supplies occasionally. It sneaks them. Yin knows Nestor is doing it, and that's all a part of the control that Yin is trying to put in. He's trying to seem like, oh, I don't see them taking the Perrier water. And Nestor is like, okay, I'll take the Perrier water. And he gives them the whole. And then everybody thinks Nestor is still at least being a little bit on the inside, getting them, sneaking supplies to them. So that's an interesting angle with his character too. And I loved the Captain Ho character quite a bit. That's another character I would have loved to follow more of, because he was interesting. I knew there was more there. I'm like, I want to see more about him. Where did he come from? How did he get there?
Well, that's exactly, my problem with his character is I literally don't know where he came from, because when we go to the camp, we see the American soldiers, and all of a sudden there's this random guy, he's the one with glasses, so to differentiate him from everybody else who's apparently a prisoner. Like, what was his deal? Like, how did he come to befriend these guys? I guess that's a story that happened over the course of the previous decade, but like, take out the cool guys with the flamethrowers on the bridge and give me 5 minutes of introducing Ho properly. And then again, that it's funny because Joseph Zito directed the first Missing Action, but there's some straight up exploitative stuff in this movie that I would have expected from Joseph Zito, like the early scene where they're establishing, oh, there's a bridge that no one will ever get across because it's so well guarded. And so to have an illustration of that, you have an American POW escape. He cuts and runs to the jungle, comes to this bridge. It turns out there's a guy with a flamethrower. And we see, first of all, a young Vietnamese prisoner who also escapes. He gets ran through with an Indiana Jones style, quartet of spikes, and we get to see him die. He dies horribly. We see the guy with the flamethrower. Look, these are movies about Vietnamese soldiers and American prisoners of war. This is, and I understand we're talking about the Missing in Action sequel, but to have the scene where the guy is like on fire and he's screaming, "Oh no, oh no," and then he falls off the bridge down a waterfall, it's almost comical, but it's also meant to be a badass action movie. I'm like, no, this is a sad end to a tragic life. Like, what am I watching here?
Yeah, there's, as we mentioned before, the weight is gone from that action, and the scene is not what the setup is supposed to be, like a actual like action scene. It's not like like you're normally seeing. It's a one guy just trying to make it through, and he gets torched alive. I mean, that's pretty dang serious and intense. Never mind the fact you're trying to torch the guy on a bridge made of wood and weed rope. And you better get out there with a fire extinguisher, because even though you've got good aim with the flamethrower, that bridge was partly on fire. Now, later on, Braddock says, fuck it, I'm just going to torch the whole bridge in Braddock style. But this first scene is supposed to, you can see they are intending it to be something more than just your cheesy action film. There's supposed to be weight to it, but it's handled like a lot of things that we've talked about tonight, haphazardly, and to where they may have had this intention, but it does not come off like that. It comes off, as you've mentioned, either comical or empty for the most part. I mean, it doesn't have that weight that a situation that you're putting these characters in should really have, whether or not it's an action film or not, because you could still have your action film with Braddock blowing shit up at the end, but you could still put more serious handled moments like this, do it better, and still have those moments of weight, I think, in it, and still have the explosions at the end.
Yeah, I want to talk about that too, because much like the climax of the first movie, we've got him sneaking around the camp, setting up these explosives. The big difference here is that it's during the day instead of, under cover of night. And I get that he got these explosives from a weapons cache that was stolen from a hut that Francois had delivered. Mm-hmm. But it's a diversion. He was able to set up a diversion, or one of the I think it was actually Ho who helped set up the diversion of getting
Right.
into a fight, right,
Yep.
with another worker. So the guards were distracted. Two guards to watch a hut that has like these 3 giant crates of weapons that Braddock is able to just like, yep, I'll just lift this up and drag it somewhere off into the jungle. And it's full of these weird bombs that have like the Wile E. Coyote style like antenna that you pull out and you press the big red, beeping button and you blow stuff
It's
up.
the detonator button. Yeah, that's standard, don't you?
No, I don't know. It just seems like dumb action movie stuff. Whereas we were kind of making fun of, from last week, like, oh, all the bombs just happen to go off in sequence, but they at least looked like stuff that you would find in war and not in like the movie War Games.
That's very true. Well, see, you could see. I'll push back and say that you could see the 2 guards guarding the hut as a little bit of enemy hubris and a little bit of them thinking that they've broken all of these guys in camps since they've been there for 10 years, so they don't have to worry about these guys trying to steal the weapons because they have control over them. So they only put 2 soldiers there because that's all they feel they really need is 2 there because they've got things well in hand. Now, granted, they know Braddock escaped and 1 other POW's out in the woods escaped. So you would think maybe they'd beef up security around the weapons cache. But again, they might have a little bit, of the old ego of, oh, well, we'll be able to handle it regardless. You got to give props to Braddock, though. He doesn't take just 1 crate. He takes all the crates.
Mm-hmm. And once again, 10 years in the jungle, he should have been struggling. Like he does. I don't know that he messes up at all in the first missing action, but he wasn't also just like the kind of robotic, perfect killing machine, action star that he was in that movie. In this movie, he doesn't screw up. He doesn't really face any adversity. The closest that he comes is trying to find the ropes that Emerson alluded to, on the rocks. But of course he finds it within like a minute of looking. Everything works out fine. To what you were saying about the guards, I like the hubris angle. I think you could have played it one of 2 ways. Either like just spell that out and have Yin talk about like, yeah, Braddock's missing, but what's he going to do? Or you have it a matter of diminished resources. Because like I was saying earlier, I don't know what the power structure is like, in Yin's life, but maybe it's that he would like to put more men on this hut, but he's, several of his people have died. And if he asks for any reinforcements, people are going to start asking questions, and he doesn't want to get in trouble. He's like the ultimate badass lording it over these POWs, but maybe he's frightened of forces that are even more terrifying than him. Maybe Braddock gets wind of that and is able to use that against Yin as his own version of psychological warfare. Again, we're sitting here writing a better movie than the one that we watched.
Because there are opportunities and places where they could have put these beats. It wouldn't have taken away from this film. It would have added at least enough to where you don't have as much head scratching going on. They could have put a 2-minute scene of a radio operator saying, oh, they're trying to get in touch with us again. And you just, and Yin says, we'll just, let them eat static or ignore the message, give you at least some idea that maybe, which is what I think they were trying to go for with the Francois angle, is that this is a camp that the Vietnamese government or a military may not be aware even still is fully existing. And he's running, like you said, his own power, his own little utopia Yin is. And that's what the impression I think they were trying to go for, is that this isn't a sanctioned camp by the actual government body of Vietnam. This is a camp that's been there and life has moved on, except for everyone except at this camp, because Yin is enjoying the powers that he has and he doesn't want to lose that. That's why with Francois, we get that scene where Francois kind of talks back to him in front of Yin's men, and then Yin gets Francois by himself and nearly breaks his arm and says, don't you ever friggin' talk about, So you get the idea. Yin is power hungry, and he likes the power he has over the camp, which is why he hasn't killed Braddock or anybody else, because he's got soldiers. And Francois even say, why didn't you just shoot these guys? Why? Which further, I think, again, it's not presented in the movie. So if you go just by the movie, you will scratch your head as well. But I think it's implied that this isn't a camp that's been kind of forgotten, because they're always pushing the idea of your country has forgotten you. The soldiers, Yin is saying America has forgotten you soldiers. They've abandoned you altogether. Yet here, sign this agreement, which will then remind people that you're here. That I didn't quite understand, but maybe he was also trying to ignore the fact that he's been forgotten as well.
I think that, I thought that's where you were going when you started talking a second ago.
I rambled. My apologies.
No, but I'm glad that you got there, because that's a wonderful movie to explore. The missing in action American soldiers, but also the forgotten people who are running these villages. We've seen this in other world conflicts. Something ends, but you've got all these outposts where it takes a while for the news to travel, and there's some people who don't want to give up the war, because maybe they became powerful in this conflict in a way that they weren't beforehand. Not to say that excuses anything they do in the name of conflict, but it's a great story to tell.
Right. And there's opportunity for that. And I think it's very shallowly alluded to, but I think that's what they wanted to go for. They just don't have scenes in there to really set that up. Like we talked about, could have had 2 minutes of dialogue with Captain Ho, so we know at least where he comes from. Whereas everybody was sharing a story. Well, I haven't seen my kid. Well, I haven't seen whatever. Have Cap say, well, I've been here for this long and I haven't seen my family, whatever, just to give him a little backstory. Same thing with Yin. Have a scene or something to where he's got orders, like say beat up orders that say disband the camp, and then he hides those papers or whatnot. So, something that maybe alludes that he's on his own, which is what I think they wanted to go for. It's just nothing in the film really sets this up that this guy's acting on his own, except for, again, the opium running with Francois. And that's kind of alluded to that, maybe that's how he's rogue and on his own, that the Yin is running his own show without any sanction from the government. But
what if Yin was, I don't know the political or power structure of what was going on in the country at that time, but what if the war ended and he and a bunch of his friends or fellow compatriots came across this abandoned camp, or they discovered some soldiers who were left there, when everyone cut and run because the war was ended or whatever, they left some prisoners behind. They're like, we could take this over. We've got some military uniforms. We're going to become our own, military dictate out in the middle of nowhere. And we've got these prisoners and leverage, and maybe we can work something out. Hey, look, there's a guy named Francois. We can convince him that we're big shots because we have these American prisoners of war. We can get in the opium business. Again, wonderfully rich possibilities. I don't know if what I'm saying makes any sense, but that's what a screenwriter would do. We don't get any of that. We're just left with, head scratching is the phrase of this episode. And I think it's apt as hell.
Yeah. And that's the thing is, I think if they would have taken a beat and put those scenes in there, showing this as a group acting on their own, it also in real world may soften a little bit people's criticism of them painting the broad brush about Vietnamese. Because if you just have one scene where these guys are in league with Francois, or have some dialogue where they talk about they took over this camp such and such a time ago for a front for the opium business, and have kept these soldiers here as a front, and also Yin's yearning for power, you could do maybe a few, and I'm not big on exposition, but still you could throw in 2-3 minutes of that, maybe a scene or two of this group of individuals posing as soldiers and saying they're taking over for whatever soldiers were actually at the camp. And then at least you have a separation between these soldiers and Vietnam as a whole, but they don't do that. So in the end, in 1985, you're watching this film, you're seeing this portrayal of these guys who are part of dressed as Viet Cong soldiers and generals and everything, it paints the broader brush of, are you saying all the Vietnamese are still like that? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, they're all inhuman animals, and they deserved all the napalm. Yeah,
right. And again, propaganda came up, like we mentioned last week. This is another one of those films, more so than the last one, because freaking Braddock is even more of the unstoppable hero than he was in the first one. He's not even flawed. He's not even bothered by anything. I mean, the most you get is him getting angry because his buddy got set on fire in front of him. But before that, he was literally playing cool hand Luke the whole time in the camp for like 10 years, where he'd be like, no, I'm fine. Nestor would ask him, Braddock, you no, I'm fine. Like, nothing's working on me. I'm still the soldier. I'm still got all my marbles. And with Braddock, and it's just, this character, it's like he's more so in this one than the last one. And it's sad. There's so much potential. Oh, where'd he go? Uh-oh, we lost Ian. Uh-oh. Pardon us just one moment. We lost Ian. Oh, unfortunately, it looks like his internet may have just gone down. Bear with us just one moment, folks. But bear with us just one moment, folks. We do have a little bit of, which is fine because I had lost my train of thought for just a moment. So, for those of you tuning in, July 9th, we are doing our AMA. We're doing our AMA for our 15th anniversary on the YouTube. So you'll want to check that out. I don't have a time set yet. I hope so soon. Look for a trailer for it on our channel that will give you more details within the next 2 weeks here. I'm hoping to have something in May, starting May, with a trailer for the AMA that will be happening July 9th. So, so that's going to be happening. And we appreciate the Rogue Agent, Killer Rodan, popping in and saying hi. Always a pleasure, sir. You've been a longtime supporter. Thank you very much for watching my videos. I appreciate your videos very much as well. Very informative, especially some of the films that you cover. So, folks, if you have not checked out Rogue Agent Killer Rodan's videos, you should check them out, because the man has a lot of information and a lot of interesting opinions. And it's definitely worth a watch for sure. So we're just waiting here. Ian is going to see if he can take care of his internet issue. So it'll just be a moment here, folks. I did. I'm on the I'm on messaging with him right now, so he's seeing what he can do quick with his connection. So, did anyone see the trailer for the was it the bodyguard's wife, the killer's wife's bodyguard, I think it was, or whatever. Sam Jackson is in the sequel along with wow. Whew. It's there and then it's gone. With Deadpool. They're doing a sequel to the previous Bodyguard film they did. So it looks all right. Looks like it could be fun. I didn't mind the last Bodyguard film they did. So yeah. I do believe we might. And he is with us once again.
Thank you. I hope you didn't have to vamp too long.
No, my vamping was kind of like vam. It's not like a full vamp. It was like vam. I was just plugging the AMA as well as the latest trailer of was it the killer's wife's bodyguard or something, whatever, the Sam Jackson Deadpool movie. They're doing a sequel now to where it's Sam Jackson character's wife. And
I didn't bother with the first one. Did you see it?
I did see the first one. It was mixed for me. It was a little bit I'll cut all this out anyway, but it was a little mixed for me. That first one, I enjoyed a lot of it, and then there were some parts that I thought kind of got a little tedious, but we'll have to see how this one goes. But anyway, back to Braddock. Yeah, not much more to say. There is a great film in here to be had. It's just never taken. And I am so glad they led with the other film. Now, these films were only released, though, 3.5 months apart.
Whoa. That is unheard of.
In true Cannon fashion. Because they shot them back to back. And they had both films, and then they found that the second film they liked was better than the first. But yeah, they were only released within 3.5 months of each other. So that could be also why this second one didn't do so well in the box office, is because of the fact that it was kind of saturated. And we're talking not as many multiplexes. So the first one could have even been out in theaters in some places. Yeah,
it's a double feature.
It's a double feature. So I'm interested to see where Braddock is. I don't think I've actually seen Missing in Action 3, or if I did, I totally forgot about it. So
I'm scared. I'm going to be honest. I'm a little nervous.
It sounds a little bit like Taken robbed from Missing in Action 3. So we'll see what happens. So because Missing in Action 3 came first, that's my story. I'm sticking to it. Yeah, you're right. Although the write-up on the back of this DVD is a lot better than what you found, but it's still about the same thing. Colonel Braddock, Norris, returns to Vietnam, but this time it's personal, like Jaws. When Braddock discovers that his wife and son are still alive under communist rule, he dons fatigues, loads up weapons, and returns to teach his enemies a lesson in vengeance. I suddenly remember
so many
this
questions.
Film. I suddenly remember this film. It will be an interesting discussion next week for sure. Yeah. At least it started off strong, and it makes total sense now why they did what they did. And I'm glad I read this book from Austin Trunick. And so I think we'll wrap it up here. Ian.
Well, did you want to say something about Mr. Trunick?
I was going to save it for a little bit, but yeah, I guess I could drop it. I could drop it now. That's fine.
I don't want to blow your lead. I'm sorry. I just
way to go. You spoiled it, Ian. You just spoiled it.
I'm in the right place.
You're in the right place. It is the spoiler room. Yes, folks, in case you're wondering, I do have an interview right now lined up next week with the author of the Cannon Film Guide, Austin Trunick. We hope to get into the spoiler room, and I can talk to him about some of the films we've discussed this year, as well as his love for Cannon films and the book in general. I don't normally read books, so this is new territory for me, but nonetheless, if anything, we share a passion, it seems, for Cannon films. So with that if nothing else, we have some common ground to talk about. But I am looking forward to that discussion. But yeah, look for that next week, the end of next week. We will have that interview with Austin Trunick of the Cannon Film Guide. I'm very excited to talk to him about it and find out about interviews and what he's got coming up, because he is planning for a volume 2. This is just volume 1. He is working on volume 2, and that has some of my favorite Cannon films in it, including the Alan Quartermain series, which we've talked about on the Spoiler Room in one of our earlier episodes. I forced my Spoiler Room crew to watch the Alan Quartermain films because I adore them so much.
I've never seen them. I'll have to bone up.
Oh, you should check out the Alan Quartermain films, and I'm always up for a revisit. But Missing in Action 2, the beginning. Glad it wasn't the beginning. I did find some entertainment, but this one far more problematic and handled much more carelessly than the first one, is what I would say. So definitely watch these in order. Ian, your final thought with this film?
I could not sum it up any better than you just did.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that you gave me that history lesson at the beginning of this, because so much more makes sense now.
Doesn't it? Doesn't it? You knowing that? Like I said, I watched the second one, and then I boned up and read the chapter in this book on it, and I was reading it going, that makes so much sense. Okay. That all the pieces kind of clicked then, and then I'm just like, so that's what, okay. And that, if nothing else, shows you why we love and why people are fascinated with the Cannon Group films, is just the history of just this movie. And there's so much other stuff that I've been reading up, and you know what? That's why people pick on me sometimes. Oh, why are you covering only indie stuff or B movies and that? I'm like, because I've found, especially when they do like behind the scenes stuff, there's so much richer stories behind like the B movies and the lower, quote unquote, lower tier films than from the big studios. There are some really interesting stories there, far more than I think that some of the making of the big blockbuster films.
Well, I mean, you convinced me to track down a copy of the Cannon Film Guide for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's got all kinds of great stuff in here, including Breakin'. They talk about Breakin' in this one, which was Cannon's biggest film. This was second biggest.
All time?
The first mission, yeah, for Missing in Action, the first one that we talked about last week, was their second biggest all-time film, if I read it correctly, at least up until 84. Breakin' was actually their biggest, which is understandable because breakdancing was huge back then. And maybe sometime I'll spin the platter of Breakin' 2 Breakin'. No, the original Breakin' soundtrack I do own. So I have that. So
So was Breakin' 2 Electric Boogaloo actually a prequel to Breakin', where they're breakdancing in Vietnam?
No, but now I suddenly want to see that film. So there you have it, folks. Our bit of ramblings on Missing in Action 2, the beginning. Yeah, it's just wild, and especially reading up, and I'm trying not to shill too much, but it's just one of the things. I've read other stories about other B films and that stuff, like for Full Moon and that. You read about some of the things that go on to get these films out in front of people. The stories are wild, and you should seek them out, because I think there's a lot of interesting meat, and in like the cases here, sometimes the backstory is far more interesting than the front story of these films.
That's a lovely turn of phrase.
Yeah, well,
the backstory is more interesting than the front story.
Well, there was some front story going on with Captain Ho as well, and the two prostitutes that visited the camp. So there was that gratuitous. Okay, we're gonna stop, because I'm just about to bring up the fact that we have a classic example of nudity for the sake of nudity. If we didn't have it in Missing in Action, we definitely have it here.
Well, the nudity in this movie was, expected, but it's nothing compared to the random from last week, the random just flash of tits as the girl's propped up on the bar.
But it was only briefly though.
That kind of makes it worse. It makes it worse. I was like, tits. What? Get out of here.
I want to go through a bunch of movies, and every time there's just a gratuitous topless scene, you just have the word tits over it, and you have some guy just yell tits. Just edit movies like that.
Dude, that's just how I watch movies. It gets a little awkward in public screenings, though.
I bet Basic Instinct was really awkward watch.
That was a different word. Anyway.
But anyway, yes. So, folks, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. And I will say that, let's see if this is going to work. Even though we have another Braddock film, this film is one of the ones that was voted on. So, therefore, tonight, Ian gets to fire the cannon for our Cannon Fodder film. Actually, no, you don't.
You can't tease me like that.
Because I don't have my list up. Bear with me one moment. Tonight's gone a little weird anyway. But
was Freddy Got Fingered a Cannon film?
No, my God, I knew it. You know what's funny is I heard in the back of my head Freddy Got Fingered. I heard it, and then I was like, no, and then I was like, I'm not going to bring it up, and then it came up, and now you mentioned it. You're as bad as my kid and his mention of Big Wheel.
Look, every episode until you watch that movie with me. That is my promise to you.
No, really? You're gonna make me watch it? I'll watch it again for you. I would watch it again. Okay, I would do that. Let me see. Let me try to pull up the Cannon film list again. I'm sorry. I thought I had this ready. But it just got so busy. Okay, let's see. Where did I leave off on? I don't have it with me. You might have to wait till next week to fire the cannon.
We could do that. It's a great way to send off the Cannon, the Chuck Norris,
Chuck Norris
trilogy from Cannon.
Well, no, you know what? I have it here.
Oh, hey,
I have it here. It just took me a little bit. So let's see. This is April, so this is month 4. So yeah, we do have 8 left. So Ian, if you would like to fire the cannon, pick a number now. This time 1 through 8. Pick a random number.
To quote Rodney Dangerfield in Back to School, 4.
And you picked number 4, and you hit. Oh, you'll be happy you pulled the cannon. Death Wish 3. You hit the Death Wish 3 is next month, folks. So
I've actually seen the first. I think I've seen the first 2 Death Wish movies. Yes, I have, but I didn't see Death Wish 3. This will be good.
Well, that'll be exciting. See, I'm expanding your horizons with Death Wish 3, which was a Cannon film, and that's part of the 3-film movie I got at Dollar Tree. So I'm happy. So because I've got that. Check out my shameless plug. Check out my hoarding video. Well, not hoarding, my haul video of Dollar Tree where I mention what I got. So now, with that in mind, we are licensed to shill for our good friend Ian. As always, the floor is yours, sir. Please shill away.
Well, I'm Ian Simmons. I run Kicking the Seat, which you can find at kickseat.com. You can also find me, eructating into the microphone, at youtube.com/ just look up the Kicking the Seat YouTube channel. I put up several videos a week there, roundtable reviews, interviews, series like the ones we're doing right now for the Falcon and the Winter Soldier on Fridays, which unfortunately, Mark, you may not be able to join us for this week, but you have an excellent reason, and we'll just have to catch you next week for the finale. But for those who can join, we do a roundtable with Earth's mightiest critics talking about Falcon and Winter Soldier, 8:30 p.m. Central Time for about an hour every Friday night. It's the penultimate episode this week, so it'll be fun.
And remember, folks, if you find yourself erectating into the microphone for more than 4 hours, contact your doctor. So
and make sure the camera is not on.
Make sure the camera is not on for your erectating. No, great stuff, Ian. As always, it's fun to be on the show. I do apologize for not making it this week, but yeah, it is trivia. It's, you got to be there for the team. So, but I do look forward to the finale and interested to see the way the second last episode is going to play out. Though again, it's probably good I'm not on there because I'll probably be doing a lot of this. Just feels like they're ripping off Civil War, and you don't need me to be a downer on your show for that. So
you're gonna be kicking yourself when there's like 5 trivia questions about the new episode of Falcon and Winter Soldier.
No, the questions are already done, so it would have been for previous episode. Not to say that he won't ask questions about WandaVision. That thanks to watching your show, being part of a couple episodes, as well as finding interest in it. Yeah, that should be fun. So there you have it, folks. Enough rambling tonight. Thank you so much for listening. Hope you enjoy this. Next month is Death Wish 3, but we still have another Cannon film on deck, and that is Braddock Missing in Action 3, because I'm a completionist, and what the hell, we've got the other two. Might as well do this one. So there you have it, folks. Thank you, and I would just say good night, everyone.
Good night.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Well, where'd that dang